one really difficult at school would become easier later, and my brain got bigger. But it doesn't work like that. It doesn't. So there, my brain, a big brain, and then suddenly puberty and boys and then it's all too late. You manage to scrape through the exams, and then when you have babies, your brain goes into kind of mashed potato for a few years, and then I don't know why that happens. I'm sure you all know. But I want someone to perhaps make a short list of things that I ought to just knock off, like M theory. You know about M theory? String theory. Do you know about string theory? Can you conjugate irregular verbs? I can't do it now. I never could. Probably never will now. And I can't explain how photosynthesis works. I know it's very important, but I can't explain it. I was a fool to think that I could take all that in, but when I got to a point where I was sort of giving up, I thought maybe I'll go back to university when the kids are older. And well, I'm not talking about going back. I never went in the first place. Sorry, I didn't want to mislead you. I just went to commercial college. I wanted to go to art school, but my parents had been grumbling so much about how expensive it was to educate my sisters and brothers and things, that when they said, do you want to go to art school? Even though it's very expensive, do you want to go to art school? Janet, speak up! And I said, no, I did. I really, really did. So I went to commercial college so that I could earn lots of money doing shorthand and typing and bookkeeping and God, you know, I must have been, and I was so bad at it. I did, however, go to art school when I was 69. So that was a bit, I didn't even imagine I'd ever be 69, let alone go to art school. And that, so I thought, well, if I rubbed up against some really intelligent people, maybe I could learn, like, through my pores. And I lived in Oxford. Well, you can imagine how many brainy people there were in Oxford to rub up against one way or another. There was, for instance, Sir Isaiah Berlin, who is one of the great geniuses of the 20th century, Lord Asa Briggs, and he used to laugh so much. He thought I was so funny, but he never somehow managed to impart anything that I, you know, it was just great company. Well, and then I found this man on the train, Sir Alan Muir Wood, who was an engineer. Well, it's hopeless. I knew I would never really absorb anything that way. And then I met Richard Ingrams, who was the editor of Private Eye, and he was so witty. He was probably the wittiest, cleverest man of the whole of our society. In some ways was introduced to this type of journalism that Private Eye introduced. And he just lived up the road. So my dog just happened, taking the dog for a walk. You know, dogs are great for getting off with people. Have you noticed that, Leah? Anyway, my dog went into the gate, into his garden, and he came out and said, oh, hello, dog. No, he's not American. Anyway, it was him, Richard Ingrams, oh my God. Anyway, and I thought, perhaps I can learn to be witty and acerbic and maybe, anyway, he didn't. He was so kind. That's what he gave me. He got water for my dog, who was panting as much as I was. He looked at the dog's feet to make sure there weren't any thorns in it. He gave me kindness. It so did not fill the bill. I didn't want kindness. Got plenty of that at home. I wanted wit. Some people are never satisfied. Well, anyway, I started writing seriously, and I went to, as a freelance, and I went to a party down in Devon, and I met this young man who said that he worked on Private Eye with Richard Ingrams as his boss. So he said, just give me your work, I'll put it on his desk, and hey presto, you'll get published, no doubt. But I never saw him again. He was obviously masquerading as a sub-editor, whereas in fact he was really a seducer of gullible and ambitious old ladies like me. Anyway, the years rolled by and I found myself in Bermagui sitting next to Samira. Samira! His IQ is off the scale. So I had this date with Samira every Saturday to teach me stuff, and we did internal combustion engine, we did heat pumps. I bet you don't even know what a heat pump is. Janine does, she's probably got one, Reverse refrigeration. This woman is a fucking genius.
That's all I know.
Anyway, our meetings soon deteriorated. We got caffeine rush, and he always got back to his favourite subject, which is, I think, mopeds.
Cars.
Old cars. Then my husband fell down and hit his head and had a subdural hematoma and went to this wonderful hospital and had brain surgery, and there was this gorgeous surgeon. And do you know, he explained to me so much about brain surgery, and I felt for the first time in my life I had missed my vocation. I should have been a brain surgeon. Do you know, brain surgery is not rocket science. It's quite easy. I mean, once you've got the gloves on and, you know, I won't go into that. Then my friend Sonia said, Janet, you should write a book. And I said, write a book? And she said, yes, write about what you know, because that's all you should write about. And I said, look, I know a lot about not being very clever, and I know a lot about death, because I had a baby die, had 2 husbands die, I had, you know, everybody around me dies. So can I write about death and not being very clever? I don't think so. But anyway, since then I've thought about it, but I've been too busy living it to write about it. But I had this bright idea that I could write a book, how to fake it. Because, for instance, if you're well educated, you know how to pronounce Goethe. You know about things like what Freud said and did. You know how to make a souffle. I mean, you don't waste time making rock buns. Anybody can make rock buns. If you're going to do anything, make it a souffle. And you can just learn things that you don't really know, but at least you know the names of the things you don't know, and you can really, in fact, I could write a really good book like that. You wouldn't need to buy it, you lot. Anyway, what you can do for me is write a list of anything that you're expert at, that you think I ought to master in the next few years, so that it doesn't really matter that I wasn't very well educated, because I sure have faked it quite well so far, but I want to satisfy the inner genius now. I don't want to know anything that's not absolutely up to date, and I'm sure you women have got lots of suggestions. And I met a genius, Sir Peter Ustinov, and we laughed and laughed and laughed and laughed and laughed and laughed, and it made me realise that, you know, cleavage is actually far more useful to a woman than a good brain. And I hate saying that. I am actually afraid it's true. I must be running out of time. Does anybody want a P stop or a T stop or anything, or just tell me to shut up? But I'll whiz through who I am, because I'm Janet Vivian Beasley. I was born 1933 in England, in Oxford, and then I married and became Janet Barney. Then Roy Barney, my then husband of 17 years, died in my arms at the railway station. It was terrible. And then, well, it was terrible in a way, because he was, you know, gorgeous. I would have liked more, but, you know, it wasn't the end of the world for me, and as I went on, I had you know, the rest of life wouldn't have been the same. I would have probably been stuck in bloody Berkshire still now. Then I met, who did I meet? I must tell you about the times I was engaged. Roy was very charismatic. He was 18 years older than me, and he took me to hear Krishnamurti and other great Indian gurus and things, and Gurdjieff and so on, and I was impressed. But he taught me about this sort of spiritual stuff, and then one Saturday afternoon after being to Portobello Market, and we had all this great stuff, we were cooking, and then we were talking about flying and being spiritual, and he said, darling, will you fly with me? Because we'd been talking about all this stuff about spirit and all that, and I thought, oh, he wants me to go into meditation with him or do some levitation or something. Will I fly with him? Yes, I said. Actually, we hadn't had sex at that point. I could have had thoughts that it might, you know, I said yes. And apparently what he was saying was not fly with me, but will you marry me? And I said yes. And when he said, well, are we engaged or what? Well, shall we tell your parents? Or, whoops, it is. So I thought, well, perhaps I'll break it to him. He was so happy, and we had some champagne. I thought, God, I'll break it to him later. This is but I never did. So we got married, had 4 children.
This is still the first husband.
This is the first husband.
This is still the first husband.
One day, the station master, we used to have station masters, and they used to know who you were, and they'll name good morning and all that. He rang me up and he said, Mrs. Barney, your husband has collapsed at the station, you better come. So I went down, and he died in my arms, and it was, I won't go on about that. But then I had a few years which were quite different, and then I met Brian Henry, whose name I now bear. And he similarly was very, very keen to marry me. Unfortunately, he was married and had 4 children. He didn't mention that at the beginning, but anyway, how I met him was that I was a film producer at the time, and I had this job. I had a type list, which I had, of all these men in alphabetical orders who were coming to be interviewed for the film, on film. And somebody had said that Brian Harper, who was the CEO of Ulster Television, was quite the most eligible, charming, gorgeous man. So I jolly well ought to meet him if I knew what was what. So Brian Harper, he did look quite nice. So as he came down off the stage and the cameras stopped, and I said, would you like to come to my office, because I'd really like to show you my show reel. And he said yes, and he was in a hurry when he came in, and he said, I'd love to see them now, but because I had a whole lot of films that my company had made, which I was supposed to promote to get more business. That's part of my job. So he said, look, bring them around next week, bring my secretary, and I'll take you out to lunch, and here's my card. I thought, oh, Brian Harper. I said, it wasn't Brian Harper at all. His name was Brian Henry, and I married him a year later, or something like that. And I thought, wow, B.H., Brian Harper, Brian Henry, just a slight. Well, I wasn't going to marry him, but when I said no, he cried. And I've never seen a man cry before. And I couldn't stand it. I thought, yes, of course I married him. Does he stop crying? And I married him for 22 years. Can you believe it? Can you believe it?
I believe kind
When I, in between the 2 marriages, I went shopping in the car. It started to rain, but great big drops, I mean huge drops. And as I went past the bus stop into town, there was this guy standing getting really very wet he was wearing orange and he had long hair and everything, and it wasn't Premdar, by the way. And I thought, I'm single now and I can do anything I like. So I ran down the window and I said, do you want to lift into town? I didn't fancy him.
You did or you didn't?
I didn't. Well, no, I didn't. I didn't know I was allowed to fancy people. Don't doubt me. There's a long story there. So he said, yes, hop in. And we went into town, the rain came down, and I said, well, what do you do? And he said, he's a window cleaner. And I said, come and clean my windows. And he said, okay, on Monday. He said, whoops. No, not Monday, I'm busy on Monday. Anyway, he came, and he didn't finish. And I said, when are you going to finish? And he said, Monday. I can't do it Monday because I'll be tired on Monday. And I said, tired on Monday? He said, yes, you've been awake all weekend doing some encounter group. I never heard of encounter group. He was going to stay awake for 48 hours. And anyway, he said he'd come back, finish the windows, which he did. And when I opened the door, there were two of them there, both very orange. And one of them was Brenda. So they said, would I like to do this group? It was only £25. Bring my son. And I thought, well, I've never done any like this before. I'll do it. So I went along to this lonely barn, out on the moors, and God, it was like nothing. I mean, I was size 16 plus. I wore tweeds, I wore nylons and court shoes, and I had a perm. Mortgages, that sort of thing. And within 24 hours, I was dancing naked in a bar. My God! Thinking it was normal. Where have I been? Anyway, it was nothing to do with the dancing or the nakedness, but it did something to my head. It really did. So when I got back from that amazing experience, I had to fess up a lot of things that prejudices and things. It was a really big breakthrough. It was based on a lot of Osho's work, but Viresh, who was this wonderful counsellor, had created this technique where people were so nasty to you that you couldn't stand it anymore. And you cried a lot, and then you got better, and then you felt good, and then they did it again. And then you were so hot and tired, and you couldn't drink or eat or sleep. No sleep, please let me sleep. No. It's not quite like that, but that's near enough. So I was very upset because my husband, who just died, and the two things he never did. He never said I was beautiful, and he never, what was the other thing? Oh yes, he never said I love you.
What was that?
What was the other thing?
What was the other thing? He never said I was beautiful, and he never said I love you for 17 years. So when he died, I thought, serves him right. I'm going to find something. And I found something who said it about 10 times a day, and I realised, well, that's another story. Well, anyway, after the funeral, I went home and opened Bear House door, opened the door, and he had, I should say, this African grey parrot all his life, who he actually was much more affectionate towards than he was to me. But he did, that's a bit unfair, but he was very fond of it. Parrot came first, after all. And as I stepped into the house, the parrot said, darling, I love you. His voice, which was, completely cracked me up. I thought, this is such a weird world I'd stepped into. And I then realised that I'd got a hell of a lot of life left to live, and so I had the parrot, I had the children, and I better get on with it like the rest of my life.
This was in between the two.
That was in between, yeah. That's right, that's quite right. And after I came to Australia, I often thought about looking back on which were the key, what were peak experiences or life-changing experiences. Of course, that marathon stay awake was one, huge one. And I went up, when I got here, I went up to Byron Bay and took mind-changing Brazilian, Amazonian vomit-making drug, which sent me into another dimension. And I got there, I looked around, I thought, I know whose fault this is. I'll kill him. I'll kill him when I get back to normal. I'll kill him. And I sort of kept wafting in and out of consciousness. I hope this doesn't offend any of you puros, but I had to do some of this stuff because I had been such a good girl all my life, and I was 70 and a half, and I had to get on with it, you know. So I came to and I saw a certain person, and I thought, I'll kill him, but I didn't. I picked up this vomit bowl, threw it at him, and it hit him on the head, and I was back into this kind of, and I turned into a licorice all sorts. And a voice over my shoulder said, "What do you want?" I said, "I asked you to explain how the universe works, and you've turned me into a fucking licorice all sorts." And the voice said, "You're on a roller coaster." I said, "No, I want to get off. I want to get off. I seriously want to get off." But of course, once you've taken some, so the voice said, "You asked for it. You're gonna get it." So I said, "What should I do?" And the voice said, "Well, whatever you do on a roller coaster, hang on and scream." And I've been screaming ever since. I've been screaming ever since. And just to, I'm sure it's time I stop, but I wanted just to mention another huge thing. My son Paul, 10 years ago, was on that Estonia, that ferry disaster which sank and hundreds of people drowned, and he wasn't. You know, it was amazing how lucky we were that he didn't drown. And the reason he survived, he was on a life raft with 16 people, 8 of whom were dead by the morning, and he cuddled up to the dead bodies to keep warm. And he did that tiger breath, you know, the yoga, like a baby, because it vibrates on the jugular vein, warms you up. And although he nearly froze to death, that, he said, saved his life. And anyway, there he is, and he got married 2 weeks ago to that lovely girl, and that's my, and I didn't, you know, I didn't go to England for the wedding, could kick myself, because I'm going in a little while, but I missed that, and I'm really sorry. And this is my younger son, Alaric, who is absolutely gorgeous, and keeps a lot of young ladies happy. Right. This is a favourite. You know that PowerPoint thing? I must get Janine to teach me how to use PowerPoint. So this is my favourite picture of me.
You better pass that one round. That's a gem, that one.
This is me in Saint-Tropez in 1950.
She's a hottie.
She still is.
Yeah, she still is.
Oh, trust me, I'm monogamous. Back I've got, trust me, I'm polygamous. Anyway, my granddaughter, Holly, is now an art student, and she is head of some kind of punk cult. And her great ambition is to be a tattoo artist. Enough said.
Enough said.
Enough said. And, okay. Now this house I'm going to show you is where I lived for 45 years, and it was very hard work. It does look gorgeous, and it was gorgeous, but don't be fooled. It was incredibly hard work, and I'm not sure if it was worth it, because, you know, if I'd lived in a tiny house, which would have allowed me to be clean and tidy, I wouldn't have sold it for enough money to come and live in Australia. So it's called Bear House. It was very historic. And I did gardening and gardening and gardening and gardening. I even planted that tree as a little twig, can you imagine it? And I would love to say that, look at it and say, oh, wasn't it wonderful? It was very, very mixed indeed. But I was lucky because it was so quiet. There was no traffic. There were lambs. If there were lambs without their mothers, would put them in the oven, in the cool oven to keep them warm. You know, it had an argo, you know, it has a cool oven. It was wonderful. Keep the lambs
you
in.
wouldn't.
Not to eat, cook.
Just to make them survive. Okay.
There's layers, you put them in the oven.
Now, it's time, perhaps we'll have a break because I want just to do this little 10-minute play after the break. And the point of that is to show quite dramatically that there's a lot to be done to educate young girls about their bodies, about sexuality, about... I don't even want to use things like... I don't want to use a lot of prosy words, but there's so much still to be done. There's too many girls who are exploited, and I think it really starts right in the bathroom at home, and that's what the little play is about. And it's typified by the fact that my parents told me nothing about anything at all, finished. But when I told my father that I was engaged to an Irish BBC announcer called Ian McDermott, and could I bring him home next weekend to meet the family, and he said, yes, are you sure? Are you sure? Is this what you really want? Because there's a lot you should know about relationships. And I thought, yes, come on, tell me. And sex, and tell me. Nothing. All he said was this famous, don't play your trump card too soon. Don't play your trump card. That was the only thing he ever told me about love, sex, anything. And when my mother thought that she ought to perhaps tell me something about menstruation, I just saw her total embarrassment, and I said, it's all right, Mummy, I know. And she said, oh, that's all right then. But of course I didn't. Let's have a little break, and then the four of us, are just going to read a short play. I never got down to my heart surgery. There are. Last August, a very nice man called Professor Chubb took my heart out and held it in his hand, and he sewed it into it a new valve, and then he shoved it back in again, and there's the mark. And then he put 6 staples in, ding, closed it up again. Here I am.
Brand new.